All right. Start in just a couple of minutes here. Hope everyone is well.
Feeling good.
All right, all right, all right, all right. Good evening, everyone. Good day to you. Hello, greetings. Welcome all. This is our weekly seminar sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We are doing things a little bit differently today. Welcome to our virtual book event sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and we are actually going to be highlighting a 76-page manifesto titled A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. All proceeds go to political work. FYI, books can be purchased through Amazon, and I promise you we will be reiterating and reintroducing ways for purchasing the books throughout tonight's event. So don't worry, make sure you have your Amazon accounts opened and logged in so you can go ahead and add it to your cart as soon as we give you more details. For now, I want to start off by humbly introducing myself. My name is Shukura Ayalua Umi. I am a proud member of this organization and a humble facilitator for today's festivities. We hope that you all join us today with healthy, sound mind, body, spirits, and soul. We know that you could be spending your time doing many other things, and we're truly thrilled you chose to log in today. We promise you, you will walk away today with more tools to build an organization or to join one that is working for justice so humanity can be free of oppression and malicious isms. Please note that we have people who are joining us from various platforms ranging from Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. So if you are not a member of the panel today, if you are not scheduled to speak, we do ask that you remain muted so that you can use the chat actually as a way to verbalize your concerns, questions, comments, anything that you have. Feel free to use those chats. We do have people monitoring those platforms, so we will make sure to address any questions or concerns that you all have. I am going to start us off today by introducing today's speakers, and then I will tell you the flow of tonight's event. So, we are graciously joined by some phenomenal warriors, and I thank them so much. The party thanks them so much for giving up their time in this way. First and foremost,
Shakur, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just look at the chat before you make the introductions, just for the latest update.
oh, yes, I did. Yes,
Okay.
yes, I did see that. Thank
Sorry.
you so much. Yes, no worries, no worries. Yes. So, first and foremost, we have McCole from the American Indian Movement, Oregon. And after McCole speaks, we are going to have our following panelists who are going to be they're all affiliated with the editorial board with Hood Communist Collective. And they're also involved with other organizations in addition to Hood Communist Collective. So I'll mention their specific organizations in addition to you remembering they're with Hood Communist Collective. So we have Erica Keynes, who is with Black Alliance for Peace and Ujima People's Progress Party. We have Mac, who is with Black Alliance for Peace. We have Onyisamu, Cha Yer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. And then we have Ajamu Umi, who is with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So those are our speakers for tonight. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what each of our comrades are going to be specifically doing for us tonight. I do want to let you know that tonight's event will consist of our acknowledgement of the indigenous people's land. So that's where Mako is going to come in, and we thank them so much for being a part and giving us the opportunity to pay homage to our indigenous brothers and sisters. As I mentioned before, Mako is with the American Indian Movement of Oregon. And so they're going to start us off. And then after that, we also have to make sure that we think about the next panelists that we have speaking. So as I said before, Erica from Black Alliance for Peace and Ujima People's Progress Party. We have Mac from Black Alliance for Peace and Onisamu with the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. And after we have a chance to hear from those phenomenal folks, then we are going to have author Ajamu Umi with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, who will read a few pages from the manifesto. All right. That sounds like an amazing presentation. I'm so excited. I know you are too. You got to bring the energy tonight, folks. We need you to bring it because it's coming, okay? So that is going to be the flow of our event. And I am actually going to humbly turn it over to Mako, who is going to get us started by acknowledging the indigenous people's land. And again, a reminder, we are going to be continuing to push that you need to join an organization that is working for justice all night long. So as I said before, Mako is with the American Indian Movement Oregon. And without further ado, thank you, Mako, for joining us tonight.
Yeah, as far as acknowledgement, um, we like to acknowledge the indigenous of the Western Hemisphere, and then beyond the superficial nature of that, to be thinking about, and I think these groups would understand better than any, is returning land and power to those indigenous folks. Thank you so much for having me.
It is absolutely our pleasure. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. We really appreciate it. All right. So, as we continue to think about putting our Indigenous brothers and sisters first, because we understand that this is their land, next we are going to hear from our comrades from Hood Communist Collective Editorial Board. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start us off by asking a question to Erica with Black Alliance for Peace and Ujima People's Progress Party. And then I'm going to ask that same question. So I'll ask it one time, but then that same question will be directed to Mac, who is with Black Alliance for Peace. But of course, other editorial board members from Hood Communist Collective are more than welcome to chime in. Those questions are just kind of to get our discussion started for Erica and Mac, but of course, others are welcome to chime in as you please. So the first question to start us off, and again, this is for Erica with Black Alliance for Peace and Ujima People's Progress Party, and Mac with the Black Alliance for Peace. The manifesto has a clear focus on the necessity for people to be in organizations. This should be a clear objective, but oftentimes the call to join organizations is a controversial one. Explain why you believe joining organizations is important.
Sorry. Just as you asked that question, he walked in. Um, but no, yeah, so I know that it's a controversial topic, but so today, coincidentally, is BAP's fourth anniversary. So Black Alliance for Peace is 4 years old today. So yesterday was our big membership meeting. And after we had the membership meeting, I sort of like sent a message to members about, how the feeling of what it is to have a political home. Because I read the books, I had the righteous anger, and I had what I thought was the analysis, but I had nowhere to funnel that work for Praxis. And I think being part of Black Alliance for Peace and Eugene People's Progress Party helps bring an international perspective to my local organizing, and it helps me further connect the two. But I think the pushback from organizing has a lot to do with how individualized we are, or how we often see ourselves as individuals and don't understand ourselves as collectives. So I think a lot of that has to do with the pushback of it. But I do think it's very, very important. My where to see my not just my ideological growth, but my growth as an organizer, being able to, as someone who was very reactionary, always willing to get into any debate, right? And now I think I have a little more clarity about good faith, bad faith discourse and what's worth struggling through. And I'm not actually afraid to actually, have the struggle. It doesn't, even if it doesn't have to be something where I'm like flippant, I can actually like engage in that struggle. And I think that that's what the benefit of organizing has been, because we're not always going to agree, but we are in this collective together and we all have a common purpose. So is that disagreement supposed to just rupture the common purpose, or are we going to struggle through it in order to get to where we're trying to achieve?
What's up, y'all? First of all, I want to say I'm here repping BAP. I'm also in repping my hometown org, Low Country Action Committee, because a lot of my basis for understanding organizing the right way is coming from the work that I'm doing with my people down here right now. I co-sign everything Erica just said, but I want to go back to that idea of like joining an organization being controversial. This is something that in Hood Communists we have come up against a lot. Like, if you listen to anything that Erica and Onye have been on recently, like they've talked about like the nonstop like attacks just from telling people simply like join an organization. Erica pointed at why that is a lot. It has a lot to do with capitalist and like individualist indoctrination living in a country like the United States. And something that Onye points out all the time that I think is really relevant too is that like it's just a lot of us walking around with a lot of unprocessed trauma from our relationships with our parents, from our relationship with our friends, from our relationship with like our romantic partners, and then some people who still holding on to unprocessed trauma from previous like bodies and organizations that they've been in. But something that Erica and Onye pointed to in the last interview that they did with the Black Miss podcast, which I think people should definitely check out, is that like whether you in an organization or you as a working as a sole individual, how does that change the conditions or the material reality if you're not in an organized body of people? I think one of the things that Ajamu really pointed out in the book that really helps making the case for organization is that a lot of people think about organizations as like, oh, I gotta join a body of people that's like 50 people and it's like rigid and strict. Like, no, there's emphasis on like 3 or more as laid out in the book. Like you get together with 2 other people and y'all start working toward a common goal. Y'all are an organization. Like you're an organization, you're a body moving toward like a common goal, right? And so done right, organizations, the benefit of joining organizations is that they create a base for accountability, a community of people for you to be accountable to. Like some of my people from Low Country Action Committee watching this right now, and if I say something on this stream today that's like out of pocket or just totally left field, not like they're gonna nail me to the cross or nothing like that, but I got people who can pull me in, reel me in, be like, Brother Mac, like, let's talk about that. You know, what's going on there? And that's why we see so much of the controversy that's happening about like misleadership and people riding in Cadillacs and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, who are you accountable to? Like, what organization are you a part of? And I think another thing that comes from the pushback on organization is that a lot of people say they want revolution, but like people don't really understand that revolution is something that you have to build. It's not something that's just gonna happen like spontaneously. And like if but like if you understand the importance of organizations, then you understand that like revolution is a very scientific and like methodic process. Like it has to be built. And like the benefit of organizations is like, it's like however many million of us walking around in the United States right now. How do all of us pass a message to the next individual to even start to build something like that? That is what organizations are for. Organizations become coalitions, and then coalitions can become community movement building structures, and then community movement building structures can become like nation building projects. But like none of that is possible without highly organized bodies. So regardless of how individual people feel, you can call hood communist violent, you can call us like whatever you want to call us for saying join organization, but that is what we mean when we say join the organization.
Thank you all so much. What I took from that, my little notes that I was trying to take down, was that just merging your two responses together, you're able to build more of this collectivism idea versus individualism, which Erica, thank you. I couldn't have said it better myself. And then I also heard Erica say that it gives you clarity in terms of working through those uncomfortable spaces and conversations where you struggle and you give up, or do you struggle to work through because you ultimately have the same goal, which is deconstructing capitalism so that people aren't oppressed anymore. And then, Mac, I really appreciate you clarifying low country action. I added that into my notes, so I will address that next time when I give you the next question. So thank you for that. And I also heard you say, Mac, you know, there's this idea of what is it, the common goal? Why are you in the organization in the first place? It's because you're trying to change the condition for people around you. And so there is some accountability there, and I couldn't agree more with that myself. There's some struggles of accountability, but also this space where you're allowing yourself to grow and to be vulnerable. I think I can say that in spaces where you've actually built trust with other comrades, that you literally would let them watch your kids or let them walk your dog because you know that they're trying to build the same outcome that you are, which means you can tell them stuff where you might need to work through some of that trauma, which means opening up to them. So I thank you all so much. I really appreciate you answering that question. I'm going to keep us going right along. So the next question is going to be for Onisamu. And my question to you is, the manifesto has an intense focus on organizing communities against and independent of state structures and resources. Do you believe this type of independent approach is important and feasible? And if so, can you please tell us why?
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks so much. Yeah, I definitely think it's important, and I definitely think it's feasible. I actually think it's much more feasible than any approach that requires using like the capitalist system, particularly like the electoral system, or any kind of like appealing to the structures of power within capitalism for liberation. Like that is the approach that people tend to take. Like when you say like we need to organize block by block in our communities to defend ourselves, to meet our basic needs, people are like, that seems wild, even though it's been done before many, many, many times. But when that same person is like, we need to vote for Joe Biden and push him left, they think that's a viable plan. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's like, go to hell, I'm not going anywhere. So like I feel like the revolutionary approach is actually the much more pragmatic and feasible approach. And I feel like if you look at the history of the African liberation struggle, if you look at the history of how our people have fought back against colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism all over the world, you see in place after place after place, our people overcoming overwhelming odds using superior organization and a commitment to liberation. Like the Haitian Revolution is my favorite example to talk about because the Haitian Revolution was enslaved and formerly enslaved African people who were drastically outgunned, who were drastically outnumbered, who through superior organization and a commitment to their liberation and the liberation of all African people in the Western Hemisphere defeated the British, the Spanish, and the French, like the three biggest empires that existed at the time. According to the people that say revolution is not feasible, that should not have been possible. But the Haitian Revolution is just one example where our people are able to use superior organization and again, a commitment to liberation to defeat overwhelming odds. So I definitely feel like we can't, calling a revolution unfeasible is a cop-out. Calling a revolution unfeasible is just basically signaling that you are more invested in the way things are, no matter how violent that is, than you are in committing to overthrowing it and building something better.
Thank you so much for that. I definitely loved how you said, if you're unsure, let's look at what's already happened. A lot of times our ancestors are paving the way for us and telling us that they've already done it. And thank you for giving that example of Haiti, because by anyone's definition, it's irrefutable that Haiti was able to overthrow them. So I thank you so much for that. I have another question for you after I ask the first set of panelists again, so I'll come back to you, but I'm looking forward to hearing from you again. All right, so next up, I'm going to go back and give this question again to Erica and to Mac. And so just a reminder, in case you forgot, again, pushing organizations, it's really important that we either start an organization or we join one that is working to help with the masses of people so that they are no longer oppressed and that capitalism is done and eradicated. So this question again is for Erica with Black Alliance for Peace and Ujima People's Progress Party, and Mac, who is with Black Alliance for Peace and Low Country Action. My question to you both is, okay, so my question to you this time is, the manifesto highlights the need to structure organizing work in neighborhoods around political education processes. Talk about why organized political education should lead organizing work and explain how implementing such a process in neighborhoods is realistic. And I stumbled a little bit on that question, so if you need me to repeat it, I'd be more than happy to do so.
Yeah, can you repeat it, please? I'm sorry.
Sure, no worries. So the manifesto highlights the need to structure organizing work in neighborhoods around political education processes. Can you please talk about why organized political education should lead organized work and explain how implementing such a process in neighborhoods is realistic? So there's two parts to that question. First, can you tell us why you think political education should lead organizing work? And then in your eyes, how do you see implementing such a process as having political education be the foundation? How do you see that being manifested into itself? If you take any neighborhood in the world and start there, how would you go about that?
Well, I think to touch on what Anya said, right, about the historical relevancy, right? We could see that historically all revolutions started with some form of political education, some form of organized political education. I mean, there's not one revolution we can point to in Africa that did not start in that way. Before giving a gun, they were, handed books and encouraged to re-Africanize themselves, encouraged to learn history, encouraged to study. And that was also the same process that occurred here in the U.S. Before they, as organized bodies, they have political education. And I think that the book, the credit to the book, that one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book, not only was their glossary, which I appreciated, that emphasized, learning these terms so that we can make them normalized terms to use in conversations when we have with our folks, but that it expressed, before even talking about how we get to organizing our people, the first 20, 30 pages were dedicated to educating us on why it's necessary to organize our people. Because I think without understanding or without making those connections, like I said, the benefit of being in Black Alliance for Peace and having a local organization and a local organizing home is that I'm able to make those connections seamlessly through political education and encouraging that. My UGMA has bi-weekly political educations political education sessions that we invite people to, and it's named after Fannie Lou Hamer, because we still are encouraging that sort of political push for Black power, but we understand that regardless of whatever direction that we take, it cannot be done without some form of being politically organized and being politically educated. And I don't think that any community can succeed in any facet of liberating itself without understanding why they should. And that should be a collective process.
Yes, Erica, yes. And so y'all bear with me because this is something I feel like at Hood Communists, we tend to get, again, real passionate about, because there's just this push, there's just this nonstop, constant push away from the act of reading, away from political education, away from study. People try to call political education literally everything in the book. They call it elitist. They attack people now and call people academics because you suggest that they should engage in political education. And we think that's bullshit. Like it's totally bullshit. Like Erica said, you cannot point to a successful revolutionary struggle in history that does not begin with political education. And I think a part of the reason why people, again, are so anti-political education is because they don't understand what political education is. Like when we're talking about political education, we're talking about blueprints and we're talking about like real clarity. And so like, for example, so much of people's like trauma related to being in organizations or rejection of organizations is because people don't understand how much political education needs to guide your organizational work. Like political education really is like, it's like the great like equalizer when it comes to like disagreement within your organization or within coalitions that your organization may be in. And this is something that I know to be true, especially as a member of Low Country Action Committee. Like as we are talking about how we want to move as a collective, as we are working through disagreements in various coalitions that we might be a part of, when we get to a point where we feel like we're just spinning our wheels and like now we just at the point where we just talking shit, it's like, let's go back to political education. Pull up all the sources that you can on the argument. Let's lay out all sides of the argument. Let's get some articles in here. Let's get some quotes in here. Let's get some videos in here. And like, let's actually educate ourselves before we just keep talking shit, right? Like, so that's like one part of it. I think that like also there's too many people walking around believing that we are all in 2021 about to create something for the first time. Going back to what Erica was saying about how this thing is like historic, like why wouldn't you study? African people have such a rich history of revolution wherever we've been displaced. Onya talked about Haiti. You can point to Cuba. You can point to all the revolutionary struggles on the continent of Africa from like the 60s through the 80s. Like why wouldn't we, like football teams study, they watch highlight reels, they study the past mistakes they made, they study their opponents. If you're preparing for revolution, why the fuck wouldn't you study for like all these things, right? And so like I think that if you look at like kind of two examples, one that only really kind of put on my radar when we talk about like how we continue to make mistakes in organizing spaces, we're still making mistakes about we're still having all these issues navigating gender and women and sexuality in our movements, asking these questions about like, what is the role of women in revolution? But like, if you just read about the revolutionary struggles in places like Guinea-Bissau, right? Like there's a blueprint there for like how women led and navigated revolution. We don't have to ask these dumbass questions, like already been done. Like we be having all these conversations about like representation, like, oh, we getting like a black vice president, we getting black presidents, we getting black the faces in high places. Like Nkrumah lays out for us in like class struggle in Africa, like what neo-colonialism looks like, so that we wouldn't be falling into these same traps in 2021. But if you are discouraged from reading the revolutionary history and struggle of your people, of course you're not gonna like know these things. And so this lack of PE, I think, is going to keep us running, spinning our wheels and like making the same mistakes. But like we have to do it. Like we have to do it. And so not only
there's just one problem with the setup.
Erica, you was about to say something?
Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. So and when we're talking about like how to implement it, like political education can be implemented in your organization however best fit like the needs of your organization. And Low Country Action Committee, even in Hood Communists, we don't have any meetings that don't involve some aspect of political education. If there's a majority of us getting on the phone, whether that's like or Zoom or in person, whether that's at the beginning of the meeting or the end of the meeting, we're gonna talk about a quote, we're gonna talk about a video, we're gonna read something ahead of time. And that's a great time where, you know, another thing, people come at us and be like, well, everybody can't read. All right, well then during your political education, read out loud, like read it together. Like there's opportunities to get away or get around a lot of the bullshit that people are presenting as reasons or obstacles to effective political education. Just to take it back to the book a little bit. So I'm in Low Country Action Committee, but like I just moved back to my hometown. Like I'm staying in my parents' house, and something that I'm really focused on with my like childhood best friends is like building an organization from the ground here, like where we live. And this book was like a great guide in order to help us do that. And so when I say that like political, like there's ways to make political education work, like there are ways to make political education work. Like we came together, and we're now in the phase of like developing our surveys for our community, getting ready to go out and like knock on doors to like take account of like what people need, what people want. But before that, we read like the first 3 chapters together. And like people be like, it's elitist, like everybody didn't go to college. Like we went to a high school in the 2nd Forest District in South Carolina. These are my childhood best friends. Like people would tell you that we was never supposed to be able to like, you know, think about revolutionary concepts or like talk about socialism or capitalism, all this kind of stuff. And I'd be dead ass on the phone with my best friends, like talking about socialism and capitalism, like just based on reading like 3 chapters of a book, like making that in that first 3 chapters, Ajamu makes the argument really for like understanding our relationship as Africans in the States to the larger Africa. People love to pretend that is a conversation that people just cannot grasp, right? But then we had the conversation, and I realized like we're talking like, oh shit, like yes, we all on the same page. And me and my best friend, we was actually out at the track the other morning just walking, and we was talking about how gas prices is creeping up. And she said something like, yeah, you know, like the US about to go invade somebody else shit and take some more shit that don't belong to them. That's like the result of like just like one session of political education. You know what I mean? And so I'm just like, we have to do it by any means necessary. We have to keep doing it. It's important. And in anything that we doing in our organizations with that's not being led by political education is bullshit. We just leading ourselves down some kind of like trail where we're either working hard for no reason or we're making up shit. So those are my thoughts on that.
Mac, you made my mouse freeze up. You brought so much fire. My mouse froze up. I couldn't even unmute myself. Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you, Mac. I really, really appreciate your feedback. So just like a quick little summation of what I heard from both of you. So again, looking at the history, where have our ancestors taught us and where are we now? What is political education? I think it's first important for us to understand what that is, which means using that glossary in the back of the book. Thank you, Erica, for pointing that out, so that we can truly be on the same page how these terms are being defined, and then of course know how to use them in more conversations with people. And then I love, Mac, how you talked about how we need to look at what the data is saying. So if we're listing these articles, if we're looking at this evidence and it's irrefutable, so now we're on the same page. We all have read the same thing, so we can have discussions. If we have questions, we can talk about some of those questions. Well, I read it this way and interpreted it this way. There's different learning styles. Like from the beginning of time, Africans are aware that specifically African children learn differently because we are so creative in how we take in information. So I think creating these spaces where people can be vulnerable again to say, I really didn't understand that, or I read that this way and you're going this way. What does that even mean? Being able to talk about that and pull through that. And then what I pulled from both you, Erica, and Mac also is, what is this idea that the book is practicing? So the book literally talks about PE and giving us PE in terms of explaining to us the importance of it. And so I'm thinking about organization as praxis, and I'm thinking about PE as a theory. And we know that you can't have one without the other. We know that they are dependent on one another because you need to be able to go out and actually do what it is you're reading about. And you need to be able to do the history and read first so that you can do the action of going out to do it. So I thank you all so much for that. Okay, so my second question is for Onisamu. And my question for you is, many folks may say that the concepts discussed in the manifesto are great in theory, but despite the tools provided within the manifesto, it's just going to be too hard to get people together in this type of organized fashion discussed in the booklet. Please speak to those who may have that concern.
Well, I'm not going to say it's not hard because anytime you bring people together and like move collectively to achieve goals, you're going to have to deal with, all the stuff that we bring with us into a space. We're going to have to deal with the larger conditions of the society under capitalism and colonialism. We're going to have to deal with conflict. Sometimes we're going to have to deal with harm and abuse. So it's definitely not, difficult is a good way to describe it. But then also, just like existing day to day under capitalism, struggling to work and survive, getting harassed at work with no recourse because you're not unionized, just like existing in an African body under capitalism is also very difficult. But at least in the context of revolutionary organization, at least in the context of working collectively with other people to change conditions, You actually have the power to make things less difficult. If you commit to struggling with other people to make things better and to get to higher and higher levels of understanding, if you commit to doing like the systematic ground level work of building something for your community, of building something for your people, it is absolutely going to be difficult, but it's also going to be incredibly rewarding. And it's also going to show you that revolution is possible, because we talk a lot about how people are very skeptical of the concept of organization or being organizations. People are very skeptical of the necessity for political education. And the reason for that is because we live in an individualist society that teaches us that we can only affect our own immediate bubble, that is like every man for himself. But what being in an organization shows you, what undergoing that process of systematic political education shows you, is that once people are unified and organized and moving in the same direction, there is very little we cannot achieve. Once the people decide that they are going to be free and that's just how it is, there are very few forces that can stop that people. The problem that the masses of African people are facing right now is not that we are outgunned, as Malcolm X said. The problem is that we are out organized. The problem is that we are facing a system that is organized from top to bottom to oppress us and confuse us, and we don't yet have an organized way to resist that system. But once we do, and we have that all across the world, across the entire African continent, diaspora, once we are organized for liberation, there is no force on this planet that will be able to stop us from getting our liberation.
I think that we could wrap it up right there, because I'm feeling empowered and I'm feeling ready to take it on. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your response, Onisamu. Okay, so I just want to thank all of our panelists once again. I really wish we could just continue this for the rest of this evening, because there's some really important work that's going on. But if you came in late, or maybe you missed some of the first opening questions, I just want to reiterate to you that all of our panelists, so again, in case you missed their names or organizations, I'm so thankful. The party is thankful to have Erica from Black Alliance for Peace and Ujima People's Progress Party. Thank you to Matt from Black Alliance for Peace and Low Country Action. Thank you to Onisamu from the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the All African Women's Revolutionary Union. Thank you all so much. Best panel I've ever attended, ever in my life. And this is a millennial speaking, so that says a lot. I just really appreciate you all taking the time out to come through and to bring the fire and the rain tonight. I thank y'all so much. I really, really am feeling like my heart is boiling. My heart is boiling with good vibes. So I'm not sure I'm hearing somebody that's off. Did I cut a panelist off? I'm sorry.
No, I was saying thank you. Thank you for having.
Of course, Erica. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit, you all. I'm very excited to just remind you that this is why it's so important to join an organization that's working for justice. So when you join an organization that's working for justice, you want to make sure that you're incorporating some political education, because as our panelists have clearly explained to us, a lot of times when you have that PE component, you're able to think about some of these other, thank you, Erica, safe travels, thank you. You're able to think about some of these other situations where our ancestors have already paved the way for us. And then that allows you, of course, to work through struggle. You're going to have disagreements, but that's okay. It is going to be challenging. Onisamu already engaged with us and told us that. So we already know there's going to be difficulties, but without struggle, there's no progress, A. And then beyond that, as Onisamu also pointed out, just existing in capitalism, period, however you identify, is a challenge within itself, especially if you are oppressed. So we already are struggling anyway, so you might as well engage with other people who are struggling, so that you can have more hands on deck, because the more hands you have on deck, the more you're able to organize, because we know that things actually change when we have multiple masses of people coming together who have the same common goal, as I said before, of deconstructing the isms that are malicious in terms of bringing people down, especially poor oppressed people. So with that, we're actually going to shift gears. I'm really, really excited. We now have a special, unique opportunity. So for those that are getting ready to eat dinner, I'm going to give you a little appetizer first, okay? And you're now going to have a chance to hear from Brother Adamu with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. He is actually going to read a part from A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. So if you have not already purchased the book from Amazon, which I strongly suggest you do, he is actually going to read for you and actually give you a taste, an appetizer, if you will, of the book. All right. And as I said, we're going to be talking more about how to access that book, but it is available on Amazon. And it's only $5 for the Kindle version and $8 for a hardback. So definitely within a reasonable price range. I went on to say that I actually researched how much an average burrito from Chipotle costs. And so the Kindle version is much cheaper than an average burrito from Chipotle. And by the time you get a drink and pay taxes, the hard copy version, oh, Marcus got his copy. Marcus got their copy. So by the time you get your drink and your taxes at Chipotle, you spent more on that meal than you would on a hard copy book. So go ahead and go out and purchase that. Mine are en route. I have not received my copies yet. That's okay. Thank you, Mark, for showing us the cover. All right. So, Brother Ajamu, I'm going to give you the floor.
So I'll have this going while we're talking. It's just information about the book. Greetings, everyone. So glad that all of you are here. I'm looking down because Shakura talked me into getting one of these doorbell camera devices, and the doorbell went off, and I looked, and looks like somebody looks like the police at the door. Really looks like a police person at the door, but I don't talk to police. So I'm not, even if we weren't doing this, I wouldn't answer the door. So, if something happens and I move away, then y'all know what happened. But I'm glad that you all are here, and definitely want to give much love and respect to my Hood Communist Collective family and comrades. Uh, my sister comrade Onya Samu, in the APRP, as well as the All African Women's Revolutionary Union, Comrade Mac, Comrade Erica. Appreciate you all, love you all. And I just want to start just to reiterate something quickly that someone said during the panel, is that, we live political education, you all, we live it. We had a meeting, our Hood Communist Collective meeting, Friday. We had political education. We had a seminar yesterday in the All African People's Revolutionary Party that Sister Onyesamu skillfully facilitated, effectively, political education. We have our regular work study meetings where we have political education. We do these sessions every Sunday. So we are constantly engaged in this process. And one of the things that the book starts out with is an acknowledgement of almost 50 organizations who have engaged in this struggle before us, currently, and in the future. And this is so critically important. We just want to continue to push this question of organization. And so the reason why, in short term, two quick things, why I wrote this manifesto. One is that by participating in the All African People's Revolutionary Party for going on 4 decades, and I didn't take any breaks, you all. I mean, I participated consistently over those years. And by virtue of that, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of very mind-opening work, door-to-door work, community organizing work, organizing defense against armed white supremacists. A lot of you read about the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, the Proud Boys. I've had if you want to look at it as an honor, to go up against these people in an organized fashion, to engage in physical fistfights with them, and to even shootouts with them. That has happened. So we have tried to take this information and organize it into a process where it could explain how we can maximize our efforts to protect ourselves. Because if y'all want to go talk to whoever that cop was outside my door, you can go tell him that we recognize that he and his people, his gang, are not going to do anything to advance safety for any of our communities, African communities, Asian communities, indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, our LGBTQ family, women identifying people. None of these critically important folks are going to receive any protection from those terrorists. So this manifesto is just simply about how we organize that capability ourselves. Okay, so just want to talk about that in that context. And if you look at it, like the way I wrote it, because again, I think it was Mac that said, just getting people to understand basic concepts so that we can think through them. Because the way this capitalist system is organized, it's organized so that we don't ever think about anything other than how to remodel our kitchens and what kind of new car we're going to get, and what was on the reality show, who married a millionaire, basketball wives, or whatever it is. I don't know, but that's all they want us to think about. So our work is about trying to get people to think about a little more sometimes, because it's important that we do that, because that's how we shape our future. So we talk a lot about organization. And of course, central to organization is organizing against the capitalist system, because that's a system that's been built on our backs and continues to exploit and oppress us. And so we can't have any type of new society that's ingrained with the same values of capitalism. That is clearly not going to work. And so we have to talk about that. We talk about white supremacy, and people are, there's a lot of work that has to be done around understanding white supremacy, but at least people do talk about it. It is something that's talked about. But what's less talked about is the need to organize against patriarchy and homophobia. So I'm going to start by just reading the definitions, because in this manifesto, there are definitions for many of these terms. And, we walk around in this society and you hear socialism every day, but 99.9% of the people cannot give you a logical definition for what socialism is. We hear about capitalism, we live in it every day. 99.9% of the people cannot define what capitalism is for you. So we've defined them in this manifesto so people can have working definitions to work with for capitalism, socialism, homophobia, patriarchy, ideology. Who are indigenous people? Indigenous people are not Africans who say they've been in the Western Hemisphere for 3,000 years. That's a fantasy, you all. Sorry. No, I'm not sorry, because it's shameful and disrespectful to those of you who keep saying that, to not only the real indigenous people, but to our African ancestors, who are the only reason why you're breathing air today, whether you acknowledge that or not. So this is something that, these definitions: imperialism, Pan-Africanism, of course, liberation. So I'm going to read the definition of patriarchy and homophobia that I have in the book here. So for patriarchy, really simply, defining it as a system of institutionalized discrimination against women, identifying persons, and all persons who do not function as men in society. A system of institutionalized discrimination against women, identifying persons, and all persons who do not function as men in society. That's the definition in the book for patriarchy. For homophobia, it's a system of institutionalized discrimination against people who do not function within the gender binary paradigm of people being either men or women, and or relationships being defined strictly as a pairing of a man and woman. A system of institutionalized discrimination against people who do not function within the gender binary paradigm of people being either men or women, and or relationships being defined strictly as a pairing of a man and a woman. Now, we fully understand that a lot of this is way too much for a lot of people. That's why we have to study it, you all. That's our recommendation, that we engage it. If you're taking physics in college, you have to study it. Of course, it's overwhelming because you don't know anything about it. If you're riding a motorcycle for the first time, that's overwhelming because you don't know anything about it. So you have to practice in order to get better. So that's why the study is so important. So we start with those definitions. And then I'm just going to read quickly why we say political education is important. And so what the book talks about, well, first backtrack and just say just a general summary of what this manifesto is about. I'll just read that. A guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence is designed to be a humble addendum to Kwame Nkrumah's landmark Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. Nkrumah's book outlines a strategy to achieve revolutionary Pan-Africanism, or one unified socialist Africa, through on-the-ground work in Africa. This manifesto seeks to provide a guide for Africans and other oppressed peoples within the U.S. on how we can organize communities to link up to Pan-African organizing in Africa to create a worldwide fighting force for justice and forward human progress. So keeping that in mind, we are again saying that patriarchy is a part of the system of oppression that we have to overcome. So we want to make sure that we do that by ensuring that people are educated about why patriarchy is a problem and why we need to organize effectively against it. And of course, I just lost my page, so bear with me for a second. This is the thing. I put these sticky notes in there, and then of course it fell out. So give me just a second, and then I will read the section we have here on why organizing your political education program in your organizing work should always be anti-patriarchal. Why anti-patriarchal? This is a question that raises much struggle among African people today. Contrary to what many people believe, patriarchy predates colonialism and capitalism. Patriarchy as an institution has been in Africa for thousands of years. As a result, many patriarchal institutions in Africa are often mistaken as African cultural components. Polygamy is an example here. Secretary's definitive work entitled The History of Class Struggle illustrates how patriarchy as an institution developed in Africa due to the evolution from communalism to slavery to feudalism. Since agriculture during this period in history was the dominant industry on earth, women were seen as production units due to their ability to produce children who would grow to be agricultural workers. A child producing human can have only a maximum of a few children at once, whereas a man can produce as many children as he has partners capable of bearing children. Consequently, the institution of polygamy was solidified in Africa, and the evidence is overwhelming, indicating the stress and pressure this institution of polygamy takes on African women. But the proponents of this practice will never attempt to entertain this reality. Despite the constant efforts by primarily, but not exclusively, men to justify patriarchy, what is irrefutable is that the voices who should, without question, be the guiding sources on the issue are most often ignored. For example, no African women's organizations in Africa, i.e. the women's wing of the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, the Organization of Angolan Women, the women's wing of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the General Union of Guinea-Bissau Women, UDEMU, etc., has a position supporting patriarchy. None of them do. In fact, these organizations have long and militant histories fighting against patriarchal practices and even forcing their entire countries to move against these practices. Patriarchy is an institution that has completely infiltrated all faith ideologies, educational curriculums, and every facet of society today, yet none of that changes the reality that it is an institution of oppression against women identifying people. So any progress designed to liberate humanity must take an anti-patriarchal position. So those of you that are African and pro-patriarchal, because I know you're here, because you always are, because this is the challenge that we have. If a European approached you and said, well, I'm going to define what white supremacy is, you would never accept that, or at least you would be a fool if you did. So the point we're making here is that there's no way that we can accept a definition of patriarchy that is not being driven by the women's organizations that are struggling around this question. And I don't ever hear any pro-patriarchal people say, well, I've studied the UDEMU. I know their position. I know the OMA's position. I know the Pan-African Women's Organization of Azania's position. I know all of those positions are All African Women's Revolutionary Union, AWRU, and the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I know I study all those positions, but here's why they should support patriarchy. No one ever, because people don't study it. So the analysis we have is sorely lacking. So that's why political education around that issue is critical. Why anti-homophobic political education focus in your community defense work? Why is that important? This question is related to the patriarchal one because homophobia evolves out of patriarchal beliefs and practices. Without question, most of the homophobic talking points expressed by Africans everywhere on earth today are textbook prepared and provided to us by unquestionable enemies of African humanity. Organizations like Samaritan Power, a right-wing evangelical organization with a multi-million-dollar annual budget led by Franklin Graham, that white supremacist, quote-unquote, evangelist son of white supremacist, quote-unquote, evangelist Billy Graham, is the force behind much of the homophobia being projected throughout Africa today and in African communities in the US and other parts of the diaspora. The strange part about all of this is the proponents of this backward thinking preach African unity, but apparently don't have the political sophistication to recognize any unity based on excluding any element of your people is a false unity doomed to failure. Clearly, the moment we accept any isolation of any of our people is the moment we open the door to any wedge between our unity. We either believe in unity or we do not. For those of us who genuinely believe in unity, we understand that unity by definition means we learn to accept those among us who may be different for the larger objective of liberation for the masses of African people. Today, there are ample sources of sophisticated political education that destroys the misinformation that the LGBTQ community is foreign to African culture. Whether people want to acknowledge it or not, qualified research confirms that LGBTQ people have, sorry, I'm allergic to capitalism, have been around in Africa for thousands of years. In fact, there are African languages that do not even have words like he or she. The long-held argument that animals have no LGBTQ tendencies has long ago been discredited. The only thing left is political education around this history and the need for real, genuine unity among the African masses, no matter where we are from, where we live, what language we speak, what religion we practice or don't practice, or whether we are men, women, or non-binary. Bringing people together is always going to be a challenge, but the benefits will always outweigh the arguments for staying disunified. This is why a strong, uncompromising, anti-homophobic position is essential. And the last part I'll read is another, I'm reading all the controversial stuff. Well, there's the whole book is going to be controversial to most people, which is good because my grandmother raised me. She told me, boy, you don't want everybody to like you. If everybody likes you, then you ain't doing something right. And Secretary told us that if the enemy's not against you, then you're not, it's because you're not doing anything. So we're not trying to, we got plenty of friends. We got plenty of friends. We're not trying to make friends with this work. We're trying to get free. So we're going to read this next section, the principles behind or who gets to do the work actually. And that's critical because there's this big emphasis today in activist circles in this backward country around this concept of security culture. And in this book, I wanted to challenge that head on. I lived and organized for several years in Portland, Oregon, here in the United States. In Portland, Oregon, I used to always joke, but I wasn't really joking. It's like the culture, the security culture capital of the world. That's what everybody's so focused on, this security culture question. And so I would always challenge it. And I always have these arguments with people. So I went, and in my organizing work, I haven't seen where any of that type of stuff is essential or effective or even necessary in terms of building strong community and organizing methodologies. Like we don't utilize that in Africa, and we're building strong Pan-Africanist components in Africa. So I wanted to write about it. So here that is. Who gets to do the work? A common practice in today's activist circles throughout the US is this well-intentioned but misdirected practice of security culture, quote unquote. In these environments, extensive focus is placed on ensuring people don't bring cell phones into meetings, and that people who are invited to meetings to do the work are required to pass some sort of quote unquote test to demonstrate that they are worthy of the trust of the existing participants. The purpose of these practices is understood, but no one engaging in these practices can demonstrate how doing these things has made their process any safer. None of these groups have found the magic wand to eliminate sexual assault in movement work, snitching to the police, abuse towards members of the community, etc., by doing any of these things. The reason these practices haven't effectively eliminated these dysfunctions is because the dysfunctions exist because of the backward ideology and practices of the capitalist system. This is a system built and maintained on the brutal and barbaric treatment of human beings on a larger mass scale than at any time in human history. As a result of this institutionalization of dehumanizing human beings as a profit motive, money is more important than people in capitalism. People are socialized to see people as a means to an end and not an end in and of themselves. Consequently, once people are dehumanized, it becomes easy to behave in anti-human ways towards other humans. Any security measure that do nothing to address this fundamental contradiction of human value will never address these issues. At best, we are doing things to make us feel that we are addressing the contradictions, but in truth, we are not. The only way these contradictions can and will be addressed is by focusing in on strengthening the political education process. It's this process with a strong social revolution and criticism, self-criticism component that is designed to encourage people to participate, become vulnerable about our weaknesses and the things we must change about ourselves and each other. This is the process that creates principled revolutionary organizers, not the practices of isolating and improvising some elitist process to make people pass bourgeoisie-inspired tests to prove their value. This is especially true since supporters of this practice cannot elaborate on how their rituals have decreased police infiltration, inter-organization friction and dysfunction, and the challenges of building collective power. These practices do nothing to contribute towards any of those objectives because these problems exist because of the inhumane foundation of the capitalist system that produces all of us. Until we focus our tactics on practices that address our humanity and dignity as human beings, the problems will continue to plague us. Mass political education, where thought is institutionalized, that people transcend profits, and our work must be promoted and underscored by, as Ernesto Che Guevara articulated, an undying love for humanity is the only true way to create an atmosphere of mutual respect, trust, and safety among us. For us as revolutionary Pan-Africanists, we employ the logic articulated by the Fifth Pan-African Congress in 1945. The solution for the African masses is mass organization. That means everybody, you all. That doesn't mean just who you deem acceptable. That means everybody. Mass organization. This means we are fighting to recruit every African into our Pan-African work, every single one. And we don't care if you don't think it's possible. We don't care what you think. We're going to do it. While you sitting there telling us we don't even speak that, we can't do language. That's your problem. You go to counseling and get that fixed. We don't believe that there's anything we cannot do, and we're going to do it. So this means we are fighting to recruit every African into our Pan-African work. This leaves absolutely no room for elitist practices that will never fit into any mass organizing efforts. All of the organizing mechanisms we have talked about in this manifesto. 1, mass organized political education. 2, criticism, self-criticism as a tool of addressing contradictions. 3, democratic centralism as a tool for democratic input and decision-making. All of these tools, if taken seriously and used consistently, will create the new and principled revolutionaries that Kwame Nkrumah talked about. And we will do it this way, utilizing principles of humanity, dignity, and respect while disposing of all of the practices based on anti-human, non-trusting behavior. We believe that every human being has the ability to transform from reactionary to revolutionary. And with the right day-to-day practices engaged, we can see the results of this transformation in millions of people. So to summarize, in essence, what we're saying is that there's a common misconception that when we say political education, we're just talking about study groups and reading. Yeah, that's certainly a part of it. But if you think political education is just reading and talking about what you read, that's just a part of political education. It involves all of the components I just mentioned: criticism, self-criticism. We are struggling to become better human beings, as Kwame Nkrumah talked about. And so the political education should be seen as an ideological training ground to engage us in that process, right? If you're a Christian or you know Christians, and the Bible is the mechanism that guides Christian behavior, then you understand you don't just read the Bible just to read it and talk about it. You read the Bible because you're supposed to utilize the principles within it to guide your life. If you're a Muslim, then you know that you don't just read the Quran just to read it and talk about it. You read the Quran because the principles in it should guide your life as a Muslim. If you're Jewish, you don't just read the Torah just to read it and talk about it and be an expert at articulating what's in it, and you don't practice any of the principles in your daily life. You read it so that those principles within the Torah can guide your life. Well, we are revolutionaries. We're revolutionary Pan-Africanists. And so for us, political education is the methodology to change and guide our lives. And so if you want an example of that, you just witnessed it over the last hour. You just seen it. You have all of these younger activists on here clearly committed to doing this work. And I work with them, so I know they are, and doing work every day and receiving nothing in return except attacks and disrespect, and still continuing to do the work. You cannot do that without a strong political education process that guides your life, you all. That's the only way that happens. I'm on here right now. My daughter, my only child, is facilitating this session. I'm a member of the APRP. She's in the APRP. This is not an accident, you all. A lot of you all's kids won't even talk to you, you know, and you got to look at that. I'm not trying to throw shade. I'm just saying, like, this is because of constant political education and guiding our work. I've said this many times during the workshops we have every week, Shakur and I, that when her mom and I have been divorced for almost 30 years. And when we got divorced, we made a decision that it was not about she or I, it was about Shakura. And so she's on here. She can tell you if I'm making this up. We spent the last 30 plus years working together. As Onya Samu said, of course, it wasn't easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy. That's our problem. We're always looking for the easy way. There's no easy way to get free, you all. So it was not easy doing that, but we did it, and the rewards are endless. But it was only possible because of the political education that we engaged in. I'm telling you that, and if you talk to her mom, she would tell you the same thing. And we talked. We had when was that, Shakur? We had a conference call 2 or 3 days ago. We do that all the time because of our focus on humanity and advancing humanity, not my individual egotistical, we broke up, so I'm gonna get you. No, we have to do the work so we can grow as human beings. And we're not perfect. I make at least 30,000 errors every day, probably 31,000 or more. But at least with this process, we move closer towards being able to facilitate the type of things we want to do with our lives so that we can be free. So at that, I'm going to stop running my mouth. And what we want to do is go in and look at comments and questions that people have. Shakura, if you can start with anything that's in the Zoom chat, and then I'm going to go into Facebook and we'll be able to share some of this.
Sure. And before I start with the comments, I just want to thank you, and thank the party for creating this manifesto and for offering it to us. This is definitely a framework, a guidance, a Bible, an artery, if you will, that we all need so that conditions can be better for people everywhere who happen to be oppressed. So I just thank you so much for sharing some of those definitions with us and for taking the time out to read a little piece of the manifesto. So starting from the chat for Zoom, I definitely see Mark. No doubt this is an awesome event led by awesome organizations and people, and I'm looking forward to. So thank you, Mark, for joining us. Rebecca, thank you for joining us. Rebecca wanted to know the name of the podcast that Mac mentioned, and Onisamu was able to address that. So if you missed that, the podcast is called the Black Myths Podcast. And then from there, I think someone was making a reference just in terms of the importance of political education, because NETFA said they used to call it brainwashing. Do they do that anymore? Then Rebecca wanted to know, where does one start with getting true decolonized history and current events regarding Africa? So I responded and gave the link abetterworld.me, and then Onisamu added on to that and said hoodcommunist.org was another resource, as well as blackagendareport.com, and of course AAPRP-intl.org. So those are all really great websites to help you get connected with decolonized information that is not tainted with lies. Jordan went on to say people learn through observation and participation. Thank you for that. I think people were really blown away with the panelists. So I see a lot of no doubt, big facts, dope panelist group feedback from people. And then just moving on, just people saying thank you and wishing Erica safe travels. And then I pasted information about ordering the book. Mark went on to say no one is free until everyone is free. And then Uncle Nidamu said, what is the relationship between ideology and organization?
So yeah, so thank you, Shakura. And just on that last point from my comrade brother, we would argue that he certainly could answer that question, but we appreciate him asking it. But we certainly would argue that, as Kwame Nkrumah said, ideology is the driver, organization is the vehicle, and ideology is the direction and the driver. So as Nkrumah said, action without thought is empty, and thought without action is blind, or did I get the other way around? Y'all understand what I'm saying? Like, you have to have ideas to guide your action. And as a woman in Ghana told me once years ago, even going to the bathroom is a political act. And if you don't understand that because you're used to having comfortable bathrooms, then you don't know how most of the people in the world live. It is political how you use the bathroom. So everything is political. So your ideas have to guide your action. That would be our answer. So I'm going to read some of the things coming through on YouTube. There are a lot of comments. First, I want to give love to our comrade, Sister Jamila, who is in the hospital. I know she would not mind me letting you all know that she was riding her bike several weeks ago, and someone ran over her and left her there. And so she's been in the hospital ever since. But she is a true revolutionary comrade. So she's sitting in her hospital bed watching right now. And we love you, our sister, you know that. And she wanted you all to know that political education happens under capitalism too, because everything is political. That is absolutely true. And then several people in the comments are talking about the book only being available on Amazon. And so I need to address that. No offense against you all, but I'm really tired of talking about this. But I understand, like, a lot of people just don't get it. They just don't understand. I know you mean well, but you just don't get it. So we're not trying to support Amazon either. We this entire capitalist system was built on our ancestors. So we don't need any lectures about capitalist corporate America. We get that better than you do. But the reality is that we're trying to get the word out. Now, if you're fighting a war and you have Smith and Wesson weapons or Glocks or whatever, and the enemy is approaching you, and Smith and Wesson and Glock are despicable capitalist organizations. No question about that. Smith and Wesson bankrolls the National Rifle Association. Nobody can dispute that. No question about that. So they're despicable organizations. They stand for nothing except inhumanity. But if you're in that foxhole, you're not going to look at the brand of the gun and say, well, I'm not going to fire this gun because it's Smith and Wesson. I'll just let them kill me. And I'm not trying to be flip, but I'm saying you all got to understand we are fighting a war. There are no publishers of Pan-African literature ready to publish something like this manifesto. So we have to be critical and strategic in our approach. So we have to ask the question, there are thousands of people buying this manifesto, which is great. People are reading it. Mac just said in the panel discussion, they're reading it in the organization. I've had a number of people tell me this. And so people are like saying, and I appreciate you. Please, I hope you don't think I'm attacking you. I don't know you. So I'm not, if I knew you personally, I would attack you directly, but I don't know you. So I'm not attacking you, but I'm saying people saying things like, well, you can buy it directly from me. Look, I'm a slave in the capitalist system. I can't print thousands of books and sell them. If I did, don't you think I would have done that? I wouldn't have gone through Amazon. This is a strategic way to get the word out. Okay. I went to Target earlier in the day and I bought some food because I don't want to starve. It's not because I love Target. I don't want to make sure the people that own Target look, I get that. We totally understand that. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. If you know publishers who will publish this work, who will do it honestly, because I've published several books and the publishing industry is a criminal enterprise. And I've had 4 different publishers, and the 3 other publishers I've had were all criminals. I'll say it publicly because I've tried to pursue all of them in court. So it's not a secret. They're all criminals. So if you're going to publish books, the question is, what criminal are you going to work with? And so, to be honest, this experience with Amazon has been the best one I've had out of the 5 experiences so far, because everything is just straightforward. The book is out there. I don't have to spend a dime to publish any copies of this, and it can get in your hands for an inexpensive cost. So that's what we're doing here. So if you're saying like, well, I don't want to buy it because I don't want to shop at Amazon, then you don't want to support this African revolutionary effort. I'm sorry, that's all it is. And then don't buy it. Go on about your way and do whatever you're doing, because you're really not elevating support for independent revolutionary African organizing efforts. That may not be your intention. I recognize that, but you're not doing that. You're focused on what you feel is important, and you're not focusing on what we're trying to do with this work that we're doing. So yeah, I mean, I get tired. I don't want to tell people I'm through Amazon, but if you have a better idea, bring it on. Let's do it. I had one publisher last week I talked to from Canada, and they said, yeah, we might be able to do so. Hey, if that happens, Amazon is history. But that's the only person. I took 3 years to write this, and I reached out to dozens of people, African publishers I reached out to, dozens of them, like Third World Press. Well, they couldn't help me. So I'm trying to get the word out, you all. That's what we're trying to do. So if you have an idea and you want to do it, I'm not paying to publish the book, so don't even waste my time with that garbage. But if you have an idea where how you can improve upon what we have to offer right now, we're happy to hear it. The contact information for us is on the screen. And I hope I don't have to talk about that again. I know I will, but I hope that I don't. So some other comments that are made are that let's see, political education dictates how we move forward. Absolutely. We've said that, and we agree with that 100%, that it's all about doing that. And then while the panel was going on, there were comments about U.S. out of colonized people's communities. And we would just say U.S. out of North America, out of everywhere. And then we talked about, some other folks talked about using the capitalist system to dismantle it. Well, I guess if that's true, that's what I'm doing with through Amazon. So I appreciate that. And then let's see, there's some other comments about, oh, someone said U.S. out of the U.S. Yeah, absolutely. That's right. That's right. So we definitely appreciate you all making comments. We have a couple of minutes more for that before we close out. So if you have something you want to add, now would be the time to do it. Still checking some of this. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Daddy. I do see some more comments. So Rebecca wanted to know what the definition of fascism is.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm just going to read it because it's easier from what I had here, because there is a definition in the book. And so give me just a second so I can be consistent and read from that. And so when we say fascism, we're talking about a system of organized oppression, a state system, state-sponsored system of organized oppression against the masses of people, or what people call a police state. So state-sanctioned murder. So for example, when you have organized police, organized military in a country like this one, who their only purpose for existing is to engage in terrorism around the world. The military's job is to do that internationally. The police job is to do it domestically. Then that's an example of what police state looks like, where they can shoot people down indiscriminately, like they do us, like they do indigenous people, like they do our trans African women. And y'all already know, like I saw a meme the other day about this Chauvin guy that killed George Floyd, and it said the example of fascism is where you're having a trial for murder for someone when we all saw the murder. And I think that's a very good way of defining it, that, in a fascist society, or society that has tendencies towards fascism, then this is what happens, is that the people who are oppressed are always on the defensive and having to justify their value in existence. And the oppressor is always justified. The default position is that they're justified, that they can carry out terrorist acts with impunity. So this, of course, we're against. We have to be against fascism. That's a part of the apparatus of the capitalist system and imperialist system to exploit us.
Thank you, Daddy. Mark wanted to know, Mark said, thank you for this terrific event. Are there challenges of having people understand socialism as difficult as trying to get many people on the left to divorce themselves from this imperialist Democratic Party?
Oh Lord, yes indeed. Yeah, that's well, I have a quick answer to that. So again, we are trying to get away from the propaganda and talk about, what these concepts actually mean. So when we say socialism, like the definition we used in the manifesto, is an economic system where the world's human and material resources are owned and facilitated by the masses of people to be organized to serve the needs of the masses of humanity. So that's what socialism is, you all. I don't care what you heard on MSNBC or CNN or CIA. That's what socialism is. And so if it's not talking about those principles I just read, it's not socialism. So this is, again, a great example. Thank you, Mark, for why political education is so critical, because if we don't have that understanding, we'll be confused. I hear it all the time. Well, socialism is a white man's ideology. I hear that all the time. I've heard it probably 150 times in the last 5 years. And when you say that, like, for one, you're giving Europeans way too much credit. Like, we know the first documented writings about surplus labor and capital came from an African, Eden Khaldoun from Tunisia in the 12th century. So we're not going to say, like Kwame Ture talked about, like the principles that guide socialist development, the dialectical and historical materialist conflict between the masses of people and the capitalist class, that's universal, you all. That's not just something that happened with European people. That's happened is happening all over the world. So Karl Marx didn't create socialist theory. In fact, if you read Marx, he didn't even write that much about socialism. Most of what he contributed was a critique against capitalism. But even if you think he wrote, about socialism, he didn't create it. No more than Newton created the laws of gravity, no more than Beethoven created music. We were drumming in Africa before Beethoven was ever thought of. So how the hell did he create music? Well, by the same token, how the hell did Karl Marx? He doesn't own the principles of socialism. What Karl Marx has done is create an ideology for European people and whoever else wants to abide by it, called Marxist-Leninism. And that's great. We're not Marxist-Leninists. We're incrumis terreus. As Amilcar Cabral said, our ideology comes from our culture, and we're African people. So we're not atheists. Marxist-Leninism is an atheist ideology. That's great. If you are, not criticizing you, that's great for you. If you study the history of Europe, we understand why that's an atheist ideology. But if you study the history of Africa, you understand why we're not atheists. And we don't see a contradiction between spirituality and revolutionary socialism. So Karl Marx didn't create socialism. So it's, we can't define it in this limited time. But what we would encourage people to do is what we've said: get in organizations that have a political education program that's talking about socialism so you can understand what it is. And we're happy to help you with that. And any way that we possibly can, we're happy to help you with that. But we will just say, again, just remember, socialism is just simply a system where the people own and control the means of production. And so, for example, if you want a quick example, like COVID-19, if you travel to Cuba right now, Cuba has issued vaccinations for 100% of their people. This is a small island country of 11 million people. We just talked about this last week in our session. They have created 100 million doses of their vaccine that they created. And keep in mind, they've had a 62-year economic blockade, sabotage against them by this backward country, the United States. And they created their own vaccine anyway. And they did that. And so 100% of their people are vaccinated. If you travel to Cuba, they will give you the if you don't have it, upon entrance to their country, they'll give you the vaccination. Meanwhile, here, the richest country in the world, richest country in human history, has only vaccinated 30 million people to date. They claim they have 133 million doses, but that remains to be, we have to see how that plays out. And even if they do, because they're so disorganized, because there's no planning in this capitalist economy, we'll have to see how long it even takes them to get those 133 million doses to the people that want them and decide they're going to do it. So clearly the difference is, in a socialist society, they have prioritized people's health. And I would get a vaccine in Cuba without a second thought. I got a root canal there, so I would get a vaccine. I would do it without a second thought. Whereas here, you got just, if you're not at least a tiny bit suspicious, then there's something wrong with you. Like, you missing a whole lot of history here. So that's the difference, prioritizing people over profit. And so I think, Shakur, at that, I'm going to turn it over to you so we can close out. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. And I was just wondering, will, if you put a chat, if you put something in the chat and we didn't have time to address it today, we can definitely follow up. So we hope that you will join us again next weekend on Sunday, and we can address these last couple of concerns and questions that came in. But I just want to thank you all so much. I really hope that you have found some more tools, as I said before, to add to your toolkit in terms of how you might go about joining an organization that is working for justice, or maybe starting your own organization. We talked about some of the challenges of what that can look like, but we also talked about how you're already dealing with oppression. So it would be better to deal with some of those challenges and redirect some of that issue that you're dealing with in terms of recruiting other people who are also dealing with those challenges, so that you can at least not feel as alone, and really start to look at how you're going to deconstruct whatever systems of oppression you are suffering from. How are you going to do that with other people who also are suffering from those same oppressions? And so with that, I just want to thank you all so much. We hope that you all continue to be safe, healthy, and as best as you can with your mind. Take care of yourselves. Remember to join an organization that is working for justice. And please join us next Sunday, because we are going to be talking about gestational diabetes and women in capitalist societies. We hope to see you back here on Sunday, April the 11th at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And if you are in Central time, that's 6 p.m. We hope that you remain safe. Hang in there. We need you all, so take care of yourselves. We have to smash patriarchy. We have to smash homophobia, smash Islamophobia. Anything that is not designed to benefit the masses of people, it needs to be eradicated and done for. So I thank you all so much. Be safe, take care, stay well, and take care of one another, and join an organization working for justice.